as we always say, don't wait for us to talk about it. We hope you enjoy the wine throughout the event tonight, and there's no need to hold back.
Not at all. All right. So we are live on the stream, and so everybody, welcome. I'm Steven.
And I'm Beth.
And we are wine educators and certified wine specialists.
We like to gather with groups of people in person and virtually to share wine, become friends, and learn a little bit together.
Yeah, that's kind of the essence of Veni Vini Amici. And so today we're going over to the northeast part of Italy, to the Veneto region, specifically where the land of Prosecco is.
Yes, so we have a little map here to start to sort of orient you. Northeast Italy, there's a couple of subregions to keep an eye on. So Prosecco itself is the DOC level, which we're going to talk a little bit about different levels of quality and regional designation soon. But just to give you an idea, they officially got their DOC, DOCG statuses in 2009. So this is relatively recent. And with the establishment of the Prosecco DOC, they were able to expand the region so it's quite broad now. So we have a rather large winemaking region. But we're going to be focusing on a specific subregion and a subregion within that subregion. Yeah. But the Conegliano Valdobbiadene subregion is where some of the premier grape, it's sort of the Classico region. It's kind of the premier region. Now, we don't call it a Classico region because Metodo Classico actually means sparkling wine made in the traditional method, as in Champagne, and this wine is not made that way, but we're going to get into that later as well.
That's right. So we got a lot to go through today, and we promise that it's going to be a lot shorter than last year's Cremant lecture, where we touched on every aspect of Cremant from all around France, and it took an hour and a half. That's not going to be today. As we were saying, we're going to Prosecco. So when we say DOC, DOCG, those are regulations that are kind of overseen, and they kind of have to do with the location that the grapes are coming from, as well as the type of varietals that are permitted. And yields and alcohol contents are also going to go into play with that.
And winemaking styles still versus sparkling, etc.
So real quick, before we get into our specific DOCG region that we're drinking today, which is a really special bottle, rare to find in the United States, we're looking at the Valdobbiadene region, but also the other DOCG region is the Asolo region, both of which are in the greater DOC region of the Treviso region. And so if you're looking at purchasing a value Prosecco, one of the kind of go-to tips is to really look at the Treviso region, because it does surround the DOCG regions, and therefore you're likely to get a little bit better value than just going with any random DOC Prosecco that exists.
One of the interesting things about the Prosecco region, as I mentioned, established in 2009, previously Prosecco was the name of the grape. So they actually changed
we are going to get into that.
We are. Steven says we're going to get into that later. So
all right, we're still on maps right now.
We're still on maps. Oh, okay. We're zooming in. We're zooming in right now. All right. So this bottle that we are drinking tonight is something very special. It's a bottle that has a designation of Rive. So the Conegliano Valdobbiadene Prosecco region has within it a sub-region that has 43 Rive, and this designates these very steep hillside slopes, and a particular commune can put their place name on there. So for instance, this evening we are drinking from
Ferrar de Soligo.
I can't roll my R's, but if you can roll your R's, this is an opportunity to do so. And so this particular area, and this is actually a single vineyard wine, which is incredible from Prosecco, where often we're talking about blends from across the region. And this particular region here has very unique terroir. It has very specific soils, And the Prosecco region is looking to develop that understanding so that you'll taste the difference between these different 43 Rive regions.
And these are all different microclimates because they're going to have very steep terraces, different types of soils with them, but because of the way the slopes face, they're going to have a little bit different, the way the humidity or the way the water in the area kind of interplays with the specific vineyards. And so, yeah, lots of different distinctions. Okay. So as we were talking about in 2009, here's the origination of the Glera grape, because before, like you were saying, it was called the Prosecco grape, but they wanted to kind of be able to make that their place name, similar to how Champagne got through the European Union world recognition for their specific locally produced wine. The Prosecco region felt that they had enough going for it, and they wanted to kind of make a place name for their grape. But Prosecco was already starting to, spread across the world, specifically into Australia, and people were making sparkling wine there. So
calling it Prosecco, and the consumer said, well, I love Prosecco, I'll drink that. But it wasn't from Italy.
And so what they needed to do first was they needed to change the Prosecco grape name to a different name. And so they did Glera as the grape. And they were able to do this because there is the town of Prosecco. And so therefore it has a place name. And the grape name itself, being a place and grape at the same time, is confusing for the consumer. So now it's the Glera grape. Also at that time, as Beth said, the designations of the DOCG regions were established at that time as the Conegliano Valdobbiadene, which is where we're drinking today. And actually most DOCG wines that you'll find on the shelf are going to be from this Valdobbiadene region. The other region is the Asolo region,
which we love.
We do love. Costco has a great one, for example.
It's going to taste different than the Valdobbiadene Conegliano region. It's going to have a different flavor profile, but it can be a little bit less expensive and still really, really lovely. So if you see Asolo DOCG, check that out. One thing to keep in mind too is that you will not always see Conegliano Valdobbiadene Prosecco Superiore DOCG. They are allowed to shorten it on the label and just list Valdobbiadene. It's the same DOCG, it's just a naming convention. They're allowed to name something different. But an interesting fact is all of the grapes can actually come from Conegliano and they can still say Valdobbiadene, which,
But that's also why we then have the tiers of the Rive section. But before we get into that, it's time for pretty pictures. And so this is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, the region of the Conegliano Valdobbiadene. And so what does it mean to be a UNESCO World Heritage Site?
Well, they decide these places based on the interaction of man with the landscape. And one of the things that made Prosecco really unique is the development of these hills. Do we have some pictures of the hills?
We do. So the lower lands of the Valdobbiadene region uses a very specific type of trellising system where they grow really tall to allow for airflow to go between the vineyards. And that's how the canes are then split, and they each have 4 prongs that come off of it. And it creates this rhombus type of shape when you look at it from the aerial view. And so, again, this is man taking an agricultural product and shaping the view and the beauty of the land and adapting to it. And as Beth was saying, the UNESCO World Heritage Site, the land of the beautiful hills.
Yes, so these are called hogback hills. You can see it looks kind of like the back. And slopes that are south and southeast facing will typically have the grapes, and sometimes the northern sides will have a little bit of forested area, but they create these beautiful checkerboard patterns. As they mentioned in the video, the slopes can be 45 degrees, 60 degrees, just incredible. And man has been working this region to make grapes for centuries. So it's such a part of the heritage there that they applied in about 2019 for recognition as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and it was granted. So.
And these vineyards go right up across the hillsides to the forests. They also are interwoven between the houses and the different structures that exist. And so really it is a unique place to visit. And to explore.
Yeah, it looks incredible. And here you can see the slopes are so steep that they have to create pulley systems to help get the grapes up and down. It's just an incredible amount of manpower. Everything in the Premier region is hand harvested. So it's a lot of love, care, and attention that goes into the winemaking in this region.
And man has to adapt to the land around it. These are not farmed by machines, and the Glera grape does have a lot of berries per cluster. I think I gained a little bit of appreciation for that one time when we went out and harvested this past year, where some of the grape varietals don't have a lot of berries per cluster, and it's more labor intensive. So it is really interesting to have seen in that video the size of the grape clusters that are grown together, and that makes for the hand harvesting a little bit better. Yeah. All right. So now the Rive system.
So we've kind of alluded to this a bunch of times already. But this is laying it all out for you. So this is a tiny little, almost pencil pine tree shape. It's showing the different levels of place names that can be used in the region. We start out with just table wine. We have an IGP, which means the designation that you have to have the region, but pretty much free reign in most other respects. We then get to the DOC level, which is Denominazione d'Origine Controllata. That's where Prosecco and Prosecco Trieste and Treviso live. You won't see Prosecco Trieste and Treviso as often, I think, as you just see DOC Prosecco, but it depends. Next, we get to the DOCG level. This is Denominazione d'Origine Controllata e Garantita. That means that there's actually government officials who go in and are doing quality checks on this wine region and the wine coming out of the places. So you're getting an extra level of guarantee that this is meeting all of the standards that the DOCG stands behind. Here's where we have Conegliano Valdobbiadene. And as you can see, you have a Solo. Then you have the Conegliano Valdobbiadene Prosecco Superiore Rive. And you can see how this mouthful can be a bit of a challenge. And so that's why I mentioned they will shorten it. It's the same thing. But at the very tippy top is a very special thing, and that is Di Cartizze. Now, if you see this, you actually won't typically see Valdobbiadene appear on there. It will read Cartizze DOCG. This is a very, very special subregion that is the highest level of Prosecco, and maybe 1 to 2% of the Prosecco coming out of the region is made under this label.
And so where are we drinking today?
We are drinking the Conegliano Valdobbiadene Prosecco Superiore Rive. I can't do it.
Farà
di Soligo.
Soligo, yeah. And that's that little orange dot. So really not a lot produced comparatively to the other types of Prosecco that we have. And then having it shipped to the United States and then shipped directly to your door is a real special treat.
Yeah.
All right. So now, I do need a little bit more tasting.
Oh, yes. We got to make sure we get some in there. So this image is as I mentioned, this is a single vineyard wine. This is a picture of the vineyard. So you are looking at the home of the grapes that made this wine.
That is a beautiful, beautiful image for a beautiful wine. As we talked about, we've had a fair bit of experience with the Asolo grape, and coming from the Asolo region, the Asolo DOCG, and I feel that the Asolo presents really kind of in a floral manner. But this one I feel this wine has a bit more minerality to it, and is really lovely. Some of the talking points that we kind of put on there is that this has 100% of the Glera grape. To be DOC, DOCG, you don't necessarily need to have 100% Glera.
But for Rive, you do.
Yes. The clay is it's clay with calcareous rock. That's just kind of keep that in the back of your mind while you're drinking these different types of wines, what the soil types are. Again, that's where we're getting our water storage from, as well as some organic material that can be soaked up into the vines. Now, the interesting thing about this wine, did you have something to say about the soil?
I was just going to add that Col Credas actually means of clay, and that is the name of the vineyard specifically. So it is a clay-based vineyard.
There you go. So this specific wine spent 3 months on the lees. And so again, on the lees is when we have that fermentation and the yeast gobbles up all the sugars in the wine and then produces alcohol, and then it dies. But it still has an enzymatic reaction with the wine, and that enzymatic reaction allows for a more round mouthfeel. And so I do feel that this wine has a good viscous mouthfeel to it, even though it has the sharp acidity and the fun little bubbles that dance on your tongue. And then this also goes with 40 days of tank fermentation. Now, most DOC and maybe even the DOCG Proseccos that we have are going to have 12 to 14 days of fermentation. And so again, that's going to improve the mouthfeel. It's also going to allow for a little bit more of that. So when we have that tank fermentation, we're adding sugar and we're adding yeast and we're putting it into a sealed giant tank, and that second fermentation is allowed to happen. When that happens, we create not only CO2, but we also gobble up that sugar, right, that's in there. So if you have Prosecco and you're like, oh, I've had a lot of sweet Proseccos, it's because the second fermentation was very short and you still have leftover sugars from that second fermentation.
Yes, this wine has about 4 grams per liter residual sugar, which, just to give you an idea, is fairly low, pretty undetectable. It can be used to balance out the acidity a little bit, and honestly, it's interesting. Some people will say that when they have no sugar, it can actually taste sweeter. You add a little sugar and it gets you to that sweet spot. So it's a winemaker's tool, but honestly, 4 grams per liter, very, very low in the general scheme of things.
Of course. Just to be considered brut, you can have up to 12 grams per liter. And it's not going to be detectably sweet, but you're going to kind of know it. It might have a little bit of a confectionery kind of taste to it.
Yeah. But one of the things about this very long tank fermentation, again, that's the secondary fermentation, is that actually can end up reducing a lager taste. Some Proseccos people notice a lager taste in it, which can be fun. But this one, they've worked to eliminate that, and there's more of a creaminess from the lees aging, I believe, in this one. That's what I'm getting.
Yep. Wonderful.
Yeah.
All right. So I adore this wine.
I think it's wonderful.
A really lovely wine.
And the producer, Adami, is a really, really great producer out of this region. They make all kinds of levels. So this is the Rive level, but they do also make Valdobbiadene DOCG level without the Rive designation, and they make a DOC that's really, really lovely. So keep your eyes out for that, Adami's DOC level.
Yeah. All right. Great one to keep an eye out. And now, our fun little science fact for the evening. So, the different types of fermentation that we can have to make sparkling wine.
Why would you choose one over the other? Are they different? How are they changing the wine?
Science!
People have studied this.
And so, the three common ways to make sparkling wine is to do the champagne method, the champenois method,
method traditionnel,
where we put the base wine with yeast and sugar into a bottle, and that's where it's going to live for the remainder of its life until the consumer has it. They put a cap on it. That second fermentation sits for a long time, probably multiple months. And to years, and inside that bottle, and then they do a whole process to remove the lees from the wine. That's for the champagne lecture. Check out the Cremant lecture if you want to deep dive into that. The tank method is a giant stainless steel tank where they put the base wine in, they add sugar, they add sugar and yeast. Second fermentation happens where we get our CO2. There's nowhere for that CO2 to escape to, and therefore it just infuses into the wine that we get to drink. It goes into the bottle under pressure, and And then the last one is basically the Coca-Cola method, the soda pop, where you do direct injection of the CO2. And so this study went, and they used plum wine because there's a really high level of acid with plum wine, and so therefore you could make it into sparkling. So this KMS and sodium, what's the sodium one? Sodium benzate. Those are stabilizing agents that are commonly used in wine creation to help make that balance between body acid and the sugars in the wine, and it's kind of shelf stabilizes the wine. And so they compared these two common self-stabilizing additives, in the different types of fermentation, secondary fermentation processes. Now, one thing that was new to me that I should have known, but did not until I was reading this paper, was that the added benefit of direct injection CO2 versus the other two is that you actually get a better representation of the base wine. It doesn't actually change, which makes sense because you just have the wine and then you put the CO2 into it. Whereas with both the the champenois method and the tank method, you have a second reaction happening with sugar and yeast and CO2 and extra alcohols being formed, and so your phenolics will change. And so
there's chemical reactions happening.
Exactly. And so they did find that there was more phenolic change based upon the secondary fermentation that happens with in the champenois method, and the tank method is kind of that in-between sweet spot. And so, I don't know, it was just a wonderful kind of scientific study to stumble upon and really kind of introduce this idea that, we do get a different expression from the base wine after the secondary fermentation. The Glera grape is not typically exported, at least, as a still wine, and so we are not even tasting what that still wine would be, what went into this fermentation process. So
absolutely, and I mean that reminds me that the Glera grape, for instance, being a fruitier grape, lends itself well to the tank method because, as you say, the tank method will change the phenolics slightly, but not as much as the traditional method. And the fruitiness, we get to still taste that in a lot of Prosecco. I'd say this Prosecco is quite sophisticated. It doesn't have quite so much of the, big fruit, apple-y kind of flavors that some of the Prosecco DOC will have, but it's still a grape that really has been perfected using the tank method to make wine. So.
Exactly. So we still have the lovely fruit. We get the expression of some minerality, but it's not going to be overwhelmed by the bready, yeasty notes that you would expect from a champenois method. But yeah, we still have a little bit more sophistication than if you just did direct injection CO2. So that concludes our little Prosecco lecture.
We kept it short. Again, if you sat through the Cremalt lecture last year, we appreciate you. And this is a slightly more abbreviated sparkling event today.
So we hope that everybody has a wonderful holiday season. Pinot Meunier Day, which is the third grape varietal of Champagne, or the third most common grape varietal in Champagne, is being celebrated on December 16th. So I hope
That's
that you
next
guys...
Thursday.
Hope you guys are able to pop a bottle. And we're at this point in time, we're going to end the live stream and open it up for us to kind of just have a casual conversation about Prosecco. So thank you, everybody.
So thanks, everyone on the YouTube. Hope you enjoyed. Bye. Okay, we've ended